Who is Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin was a British scientist who was born on the 12th of February in 1809 and died on the 19th of April in 1882, who contributed to the field of biology through his theory of evolution, which dictates we all come from a common ancestor. He also wrote a book on the subject called On the Origin of the Species, and he also collaborated with another scientist called Alfred Russel Wallace to create the theory of natural selection. He alone created the basis for what would be the modern evolution theory, and he also did several expeditions to the Galapagos, in which he discovered and observed a lot of species.
In 1835, Charles Darwin went on an expedition to the Galapagos Islands, where he collected several biological species such as birds, lizards, turtles, etc., to find evidence of his theories. He also collected geological specimens, among other things.
His main observations were among the various gigantic turtles the island housed, and most importantly, of all the different species of mockingbirds which Darwin had found along with the crew he accompanied. With those species, he saw that each had different beaks, which were more suited to eat the food which was more abundant in the island they resided in. For example, some had big beaks which were designed to crush nuts, and other longer beaks to pluck out food or etc.
One of the theories which Darwin was also famous for collaborating on was that of natural selection, which Alfred Russel Wallace created. He was a colleague of Darwin who was also an English biologist born on the 8th of January in 1823 and died the 7th of November in 1913. During his life, he published various papers concerning the theory of evolution, natural selection, and others, which were the inspiration for Darwin's book On the Origin of Species. He was considered, like Darwin, a leading expert on his subject, which was the geographical distribution of animal species. He was considered the father of biogeography.
The theory of evolution was Darwin's main theory. It dictates that life comes from a process of transmutation of species in which genes or traits are passed on from a parent to a child, which over the course of large periods can drastically change a species. Most of the time, the changes which remain will be those that prove beneficial to the organism, or those that do not affect them at all, which will form part of the theory of natural selection, which dictates offspring change accordingly to the conditions in which they live in. If the changes help them, they will survive and as a result live longer and procreate more. However, if the opposite changes, the species will eventually die off. All of this series and some more thoughts on evolution are written in the previously mentioned book On the Origin of the Species, written by Darwin, which was published as a result of Russel Wallace's writings inspiring Darwin.
A short version of Darwin's thoughts would be that life is always changing and it never stops. Nothing remains the same, for the genes inside an animal are constantly changing with every generation. However, this is not quick or abrupt. Quite the contrary, actually. This is a process which is incredibly slow and is done across multiple generations. Sometimes it may even take thousands of years for a noticeable change to occur. These changes form a part of natural selection, which is a naturally occurring process in which spontaneous changes occur in a random child, after which the child struggles to survive. If it survives and in fact lives longer thanks to this change, the organism will reproduce, causing multiple children which carry this modification.
This would all lead to the single most important point of the theory, and the main point of Darwin's book. All similar organisms come from a common ancestor, and all living things can be traced back to a single, unique origin of life, which then reproduced and evolved, creating various subspecies, which would then also reproduce and create other subspecies until the world became what it is today.
In conclusion, these theories have been incredibly important on the biological field of science, and they are generally accepted by most scientists, which hold many aspects of these theories to be true. And while some details have changed over the course of time and created what we now know as the modern theory of evolution, Darwinism was still a big step in terms to understanding our world, and we can thank many advances in science such as selective breeding and genetically modified organisms to these theories.